Good morning. Welcome to DCC Today. Happy Friday to you. You've made it through another week successfully. And our photo for the day comes from Kurt Bidinger. And Kurt took this picture of lupin in bloom up on Hurricane Hill. And I think the wildflowers are all out right now. So if you haven't been up to Hurricane Ridge yet, get on up there and it's beautiful stuff. Announcements, just a reminder, Sunday morning will be communion. Pastor Britt and Gail will be leading communion. I'll be continuing the teaching series through the book of James called Faith Has Feet. And if you want to participate in communion, you'll need to have your own bread and cup elements prepared at home to do that. If you got that email for the town hall meetings and you haven't filled it out yet, I want to encourage you to do that just as soon as you can so we can start planning who all we can invite and when to these meetings we're going to set up. If you didn't get the email and you'd like to be included, these are really listening sessions. We have them planned for Tuesday nights and Wednesday afternoons to just hear from you about ideas and concerns as we move into the fall with the coronavirus and how do we do ministry in a time like this. So I hope you get signed up. We would love to hear from you. Those will be meetings both in person and online. So there will be groups meeting at the church. We'll also have times that we'll have online meetings for people that would prefer to do it that way. Let's see. Just so you know, right now I think I am all out of round tuits. Now, every time I say that, someone sends me another one before the program airs. So in case that's happened and you're thinking, well, I just sent him a round tuit. What does he mean he's out? Well, that's what's going on, okay? But right now, I'm out of round tuits. So if you have got some project that you have finished that you're proud of, or maybe you're not proud of it, but you're willing to share it, go ahead and send it to me, send along a picture, and we'd be happy to share that with everybody. Okay, devotional thought for the day comes from John chapter 15, verse 4. Jesus said, "Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me." I personally am not a real good abider. I am more of a busy doer. And this is a good verse for me to go back to frequently to remind myself that my walk with Christ begins not with all of my busyness and my doing. It begins with my abiding. And that as I abide in His Word, as I abide in prayer, as I abide in quietness, as I abide in fellowship with others, God can speak to my heart. He can begin to mold me inside. And then the things that I'm doing flow out of that, rather than thinking that all of my busyness is going to somehow in itself make me more the person God wants me to be. So I hope that you're finding ways to abide in Him. Well, we are going to continue on today. Every Friday for the last few weeks, I've been sharing with you portions of the story of Sergeant Robert Bourquin, United States Marine Corps. He was one of the last surviving veterans from the battle for Wake Island in World War II. Got to be a good friend of mine. He shared his story with me a few years ago. I was able to record it. Bob has passed away now, but it is an amazing story. And so I want to share another piece of that with you today. So here is Sergeant Bourquin.
In January 1942, the Japanese decided to take us to Japan and put us in prison there. And the first thing they did, they passed out these mimeograph sheets, which were labeled Commander of the Prison Escort Navy of the Great Empire of Japan, Regulations for Prisoners. And the first was, those prisoners disobeying the following rules will be punished with immediate death. That's getting right to the point. And here were the things you could be put to death for. Those disobeying orders and instructions. Those showing motion of antagonism or raising sign of opposition. Those disordering the regulations by individualism, egotism, thinking only about oneself, and rushing for your own goods. Now, I never did understand that. Those talking without permission or raising their voices. Those walking or moving without order. Those carrying unnecessary baggage in embarking. Those insisting or resisting mutually. Those touching the boat's materials, wires, electric lights, and tools, switches, and so forth. Those climbing ladder without order. Those showing action of running away from the room or boat. Those trying to take more meal than is given to them. And those using more than 2 blankets. So there wasn't much we could do. So they sent us out on barges, and then we had to climb the nets hanging over the side of the ship, going onto the ship. Before I was ready to go, I had a talk with the fellows with me, and I told them to wear all the clothing they could. It was hot. And I says, I'm going to wear this overcoat. And I says, I don't care what happens, but I'm going to wear this overcoat because where we're going is going to be cold. I figured China or Siberia or someplace like that. Well, anyway, we went out on the barges, and just before I left, I had a jar of cheese that I'd been saving. Cream cheese, and I ate that whole jar, and it's a good thing I did. It was very binding. We got to the ship, and they ordered us up these ropes, and as we got off the rope ladder, there were Japanese sailors on either side of the aisleway going into this hole or deck, and each one had a broom handle or a club of some sort, and so they beat us as we went in between them, had to run the gauntlet, and I took several good blows, but the overcoat helped, so I was pretty well battered up by the time I got the hole, and they put us in a hole of the ship, a cargo hole, and battened us down, and the hole had each corner of the hole had a 5-gallon can that had been cut off the top, and that was our toilet, and you had to raise your hand and get permission to go to the toilet. Well, this cheese that I'd eaten was a godsend. It constipated me, so I didn't have to. But anyway, for 29 days, I guess we were aboard the ship. And then they'd come down and pick 2 or 3 guys and make us hang on to the beams across the ceiling, and then they would beat us just at random for nothing. And by the time we got to Japan and China, I was black and blue. And I tried to play dead both the time. And you couldn't believe it. Here there were probably 800 or 900 guys in this one hole, civilians and Marines both. It was so silent you could hear a pin drop. One of the rules, caught talking, you were killed. One of my friends was taken from the hole one day at random, taken up the top deck. In fact, they took 4 of them, took it up the deck, and the captain, Japanese captain of the escort group, had them all beheaded on the upper deck and threw their bodies over the side. We didn't know about this until the end of the war. We never ever figured out what happened to our 4 guys. And I think now, thinking back on it, I could have been chosen. Just a random selection, and just an act of cruelty. People often ask me what was the hardest thing to endure in a prisoner camp for 4 years. And it was hunger more than anything else. We were always hungry. We got about 700 calories a day, and a guy like myself needs about 2,400. So it was always, we were always searching for more food and always thinking about our next meal. And you would think that half-starved prisoners, you know, that mealtime would be a time of real joy. But it was one of the most tense, anxious systems or situations that you could imagine. Everybody was concerned about themselves. Will I get my full portion? We had certain setups on how the food was treated. Each section had, I guess it was 32 men in each section, and with a sergeant in charge. We kept our military discipline all through the prison camp. It kept us as a unit. And we would then have 2 men selected as we went around the room in rotation, would go to the galley and get 2 buckets, one filled with what we call tojo water, which was our soup. We named it after their Emperor Tojo, or their General Tojo. And the other one was a bucket full of rice. The rice mess cook would get a dipper with a cup about like a teacup, and fill it full of rice, and then pat it down and cut off the top with a paddle. And that was your rice ration. And I measured out what the rice would amount to, and each ration amounted to that much rice. This is incidentally my rice bowl, sacred. This bowl served as everything. You can see how the sides are burned. We use these for shaving, bathing, food, you name it. And if we got any little extra ration, we had little charcoal burners that we built out of tin cans and wire. And I remember one time we had a cat outside the electric fence, had an electric fence going around the camp. And there was this stray cat out there. And one of the guys said, boy, that cat would sure taste good over a roasting fire. So anyway, we called the cat in. We say, here, Nico, Nico, Nico. And the cat came under the bottom wire of the fence. And as it hit that wire, sparks flew, and the cat just was electrocuted. So then we called up to the Japanese on the machine gun. He would allow us to go over, and we took a piece of bamboo and knocked the cat off, took him into camp and skinned him, and then divided up the carcass. And I remember how good that cat tasted. I barbecued mine on my charcoal burner. I could hardly wait for it to get done. it just simmering there. It was just so juicy and nice. But I never realized cat was so good. Guys were always looking for other sources of food. We would catch frogs and lizards, snakes, grasshoppers, and we'd eat them. Two of my buddies started collecting horse hairs. We're stuck in this old stable where we worked, and they would save those horse hairs, and they'd spend hours and hours tying them together, and they made a horsehair net, and they'd stretch it between two barracks, and then scare the sparrows in, and the sparrows would fly in that net. Some of them would fly right through it, just make a hole. And they would get maybe 2 or 3 sparrows, and they would pick them and roast them and eat them. And I remember telling one of them, I said, you guys, I said, you waste more time repairing your net than you do anything else. But they said it was worth it. Then we had, at one time, we started getting this cornmeal, and it was full of mealworms. And the Japanese gave it to our galley cooks to cook. And they would make a gruel, kind of a watery mush with this. And these doggone mealworms be floating around in it. And we used to say, jokingly, we could tell how long a guy had been in a prison camp. We kept getting new prisoners. If you took the worms out and threw them away and ate the gruel, you were a newcomer. If you took the worms out and put them aside and ate them separately, you'd been there quite a while. And if you took the worms out and put them aside and then ate the worms and threw the gruel out, you were over the hill, which is our expression in the Marine Corps. If you're over the hill, you're just out of it all. They transferred us from a camp called Wusung to Kangwon. They gave us new numbers, and my number was Niichi Juichi. And I was out going to join a work party, and this guard came over to me and poked me with his rifle and said, "Bunko." That means you have to stand at attention, bow, and give your number. And I couldn't remember it. So I said, "Coca-Cola." And he hauled off and hit me in the side of the face, and I lost 4 teeth. Then the interpreter came over and wanted to know what was going on. This was the guy we called the Beast of the East. His name was Ishihara, and he'd been brought up in the Hawaiian Islands. He'd worked as a taxi driver in Honolulu, so he spoke perfect English and understood it, knew all the swear words and everything else, the slang, so you couldn't call him a slant-eyed Jap or make up some name for him. But anyway, he came over and he says, "What's going on?" And the guard explained to him that I hadn't known my number. And he came over to me and he poked his finger at me. He says, "You must never forget number. You have no name, only number. You don't even breathe, own the breath that you breathe. You are a slave of the Japanese. Remember your number." And of course, I've never forgotten it. This is the number. We were supposed to sew these on our shirts, our front shirt. But I worked in the garage in Shanghai for a while, and I stole a piece of aluminum, and I cut a hole in the back and put a little snapshot that I'd gotten in a letter. to my wife, from my wife or my fiance. And there's my number. The knee is 2, barracks 2, Itchy, section 1, and member of the section number 11, Jewichi. So I never forgotten it. So I became Niichi Juichi for 4 years. Another problem we had with the Japanese, other than food and work habits, was medicine. And I developed a very severe case of asthma. And I'd go down to what we call our sick bay to get something to relieve it, and there'd be no medicine. And I'd have to control the asthma physically myself. And that was a terrible thing to have to do. I just felt like I was choking to death. And lots of times we'd find out that medicine had come in from the Red Cross and the Japanese had confiscated it. They would steal our Red Cross boxes. They just had terrible meanness about them. One of the things they'd do would be take a letter that had come for us and show it to us and say, "You have letter from sweetheart, but you can't have. We won't give it to you yet." And they'd say other things that were insulting. And they'd hold our mail for days on end. I went almost 2 years without receiving a letter from home. Yet there was mail down in the office that could have been delivered to me. We had quite a few guys that, one was a civilian. I remember thinking about him. He went crazy. And he thought he was his wife. And he made himself a dress out of rags, and that's all he would wear. And he'd wander around the camp, and he wouldn't go through a gate without someone holding his hand. I felt so sorry for him. He died. Then I had another sergeant, a buddy of mine, Deacon, we called him Deacon, because he always read his Bible. And he went through the whole prison 4 years, never received a letter from home, not a single letter. And at night, we sit around reading these letters that we got over and over again. They just became dog-eared. And Deacon would sit over there and watch, and he'd have nothing to read. And one night, we were sitting there, and he's in the corner, and then there's a man here, and then my bunk. And I'm sitting there reading a letter, and all of a sudden, Deacon jumped up, grabbed our great big water jug, and started to hit me in the head with it. And he says, "You stole my letters." He didn't have any letters. And it took 2 or 3 guys to get him off me and hold him. And so I had to explain to him. I said, "Deacon," I said, "you don't have any letters." And I says, "You'll get one tomorrow." And I said, "Just be patient." Near the end of the war, he did receive a letter. And he came over to me and he says, "Bourquin, how did you do it? You guessed it right on He says, I got a letter. He thought I had predicted this letter coming to him. It was so sad. I'd listen to him at night. He'd be laying over in his bunk, and you'd hear him sobbing.
Well, thanks for joining us today. I hope you have a good weekend. Look forward to sharing Sunday morning with you, a time of communion and being in the Word and worship. And then we'll be back here again for DCC Today on Monday. So until then, God bless.